modeled off of a few people that had escaped their country using Bitcoin. She is in Sudan in the book and uses Bitcoin to escape from her country with her seed words in her brain, and then continues to use it as a way to get out of country with rapid currency debasement. And I think that decentralization happens at a variety of different levels. Like, I have the incentive to run my own node, and I'm going to continue to. But the decentralization metric that I look at most closely is the distribution of coins. But I also think you have to have some optimism to even be willing to learn about Bitcoin in the first place, to take a little bit of a leap to explore it more. And I think that's generally a better way to teach most people, not all. I think the average Bitcoiner might love going deep into money, but there's this whole giant cohort of people that are not into Bitcoin yet that I think need a different strategy of communicating with them if you actually want to get them interested in Bitcoin. And I'm hoping my book can help to do that for people.
Hi, Michael. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Yeah, I'm great.
Really, really cool to have you on. And I was actually before thinking that you just launched a book, and I was like, you just launched a book, so you waited for the book launch to be in the middle of a bull market, right?
I wish. I launched the thing within legitimately 8 minutes of the 108K Bitcoin, and then everybody was freaking out. Sentiment and vibes were very low. And then ever since that moment, we went up like 16,000, or well, not quite that much, but quite a lot since that moment.
And that's crazy. I think you found, when did you release exactly? This was like September somewhere, right?
Like 6 days ago or something like that. It's been relatively recent. It's only out like a week so far.
Oh, so like the beginning of October. Awesome.
Very end of September, I think.
Oh man, the October is hitting you like crazy.
Seriously, the timing has been absolutely hilarious.
That's crazy. Yeah, I think we even talked last time about how when you will launch it and like what the sentiment of the market will be. And I think I'm wrong maybe on this, but I think we've talked even about the fear of missing out, of getting the book out, and you're like we're kind of fearing that you missed most of the bull market.
That was totally a fear. The entire time I've been writing this, price has just been in my periphery, right? Like, I was thinking, all right, well, I wrote a lot of the chapters when the price was under 20K. Like the ending scenes that are my favorite ones, they've been in there since pretty early, like the first 7 or 8 months of writing it. And yeah, I remember vividly a couple of the chapters, like 17K being the price around when I wrote it. And I was like, so excited to get it out there. But then I kept watching the price run. I'm like, I wanted to get it out there where people are pretty still excited for Bitcoin and not release it into the bottom of the next bear market or something. So I feel like I've been fighting the price a little bit. I'm just happy it's out here now, and things are ripping currently. So that's been just amazing. Very fortunate for that. There's been book sales definitely trend in tandem with the Bitcoin price, so it seems.
That's crazy. 17K. If you imagine 17K, what is that for? Like now 125K, let's say. I think yesterday we reached briefly the 126. That's like a 7x, something like that. Like that's crazy. Like writing a book on Bitcoin and the price ripping 7 times as high.
Yeah, low tide preference, right? Like price has moved a lot, and it really, like, watching the price run made me want to release it more quickly. But I kept telling myself, like, I need to make this thing as good as possible, take my time with it, and really represent those low time preference ideals of Bitcoin and make something that I would be proud of for very, very long term. Because there's a lot of that where people want to get stuff out quickly. And I didn't want that to be me. I want to make something that would be a little bit more evergreen.
Awesome. Talking about that, what kind of have you seen in the Bitcoin sphere the last couple of months? I think like 1 year or something like that. It has been since we kind of catched up.
It's been interesting, hasn't it? I think the last time, I can't remember the exact price, but it was almost exactly a year ago. The Treasury adoption stuff has been a wild part of that sentiment there. It's been really interesting watching how much more the subcultures of Bitcoin have diverged a little bit between core and nots debate recently, but also like these little cohorts of people, like some of the more freedom, sovereignty minded, some of the more corporate minded. Feels like Bitcoin is fragmenting, and there's so many more subgroups now doing their own thing. And I think it's wonderful for Bitcoin in a lot of ways because there's so many different niches that people can become embedded in and learn about. But it's kind of weird comparatively to when I came into Bitcoin. Like it felt like a little bit more of a single unified community than it does now. It's just changing times, but in a really interesting way that I'm kind of excited to see how it continues trending.
Yeah, I'm really curious because we have this core versus nuts. We have that, how do I call it, suit coiners versus cypherpunks, something like that. I don't know, probably both groups are like mad at me for, but something like that, where we have so many divisions in there. But I think it's a quite natural progression of just like the community growing and like getting bigger.
I'm relatively optimistic about both camps here in the suit coiner versus cypherpunk, or however you want to phrase it. I feel like it's great for both parties that both parties exist. So like the sovereignty aspects are the things that brought me to Bitcoin initially. Those will always be the ones that I'm more enthusiastic about, or at least started with. But I also do think that the more suit coiners that come in here and buy things, they actually empower the individuals that want to use Bitcoin as freedom money too. So I don't really like to view these things as diametrically opposed. I just think it's one of the beautiful ways that Bitcoin aligns incentives in a way that strengthens both parties individually, whether or not they like each other, hate each other, fight against each other. I just think that's an inherently beautiful way to organize a civilization eventually, to have this kind of singular shared monetary protocol that we can all use. And this period to me is proving out that use case that I think will continue to be a thing moving in the future with humanity as Bitcoin keeps on winning.
Interesting. And it's also interesting for me because when we look at the previous narrative wars that we had, for example, the block size war, I mean, of course, it's like an extreme example, but it was very fundamental what we talked about in the block size wars. It was like the size of the blocks. It was a consensus change. There was an actual fork of Bitcoin, and there was a lot of drama in there. There was a lot of I wasn't around back then, so I can only basically tell people what what other people told me. But from what I've seen, what I've heard, it was a lot deeper, and a lot more fighted on, like what's actually happening. And now we're talking about a policy change, something on the node level where you could even make an argument, how much does it even matter? Probably both mad at me, but like, compared to the block size wars, like if you look at like how impactful the block size towards Bitcoin is and how irrelevant compared to this block size wars, the up return question looks like, I take it as an example that we agree on almost everything in Bitcoin, and now we are fighting on small details, which is kind of like a beautiful thing. Like we should fight on those things. I think this is a great thing that like we care about Bitcoin, but it also at the same time, I'm like, yeah, like focus on the 99% of things that you agree on. Like why focus on that one small thing?
I think it's really telling how much algorithms have changed this, where some of these more minority parties get their voices so amplified because they're very much up in arms about this problem right now, where it seems like the mass in the middle is so indifferent. Like most of the Bitcoiners that I talk to are kind of less concerned about this and do not think that it's some inherent problem to Bitcoin right now. It's just those vocal minorities whose voices really get overblown. I very much am kind of a passive watcher of it trending out, and I think it's a net positive, as much as both parties are probably kind of annoyed with me for saying that. Seeing new node protocols pop up, seeing there be a little bit of conflict, I think is probably a good thing overall for the network. And we'll get some diversity of node implementations is sort of my most like glass half full take on it. I think that's pretty likely to happen now.
How do you actually look at the node health status of the decentralization of like how many nodes they're up and running, and how robust the network is, because like there's always like the number of there's only 25,000 listening nodes out there, but then there's like this other node number that might suggest, or maybe we have even like 500,000 or 600,000 nodes out there. And then the question always, and it's actually something that comes up a lot, at least in my circles when I talk with IT security guys outside of Bitcoin, they tell me, oh, like it only has like 20,000 nodes. Like, couldn't it be overthrown really quickly if a big player just like gets a lot of nodes? How do you look at the health of the decentralization of Bitcoin with those things in mind?
Definitely not the most well articulated party to talk to about this issue specifically, but I haven't found it particularly concerning. And I think the decentralization happens at a variety of different levels. Like, I have the incentive to run my own node, and I'm going to continue to. But the decentralization metric that I look at most closely is the distribution of coins among holders. And that one's been trending pretty consistently in a positive way. So I'm not particularly worried about it from that perspective. There is the obvious incentive that if it becomes harder to run node software, it's less likely that new individuals joining into the network will. But at the same time, I do think, as much as it might upset some of the more cypherpunk types, not every single person that's going to come into the network is going to run a node. I consider myself to be a bit more of a power user. I always enjoyed software. I'm enthusiastic about it and like learning that kind of thing. And I think new people that are like me that come to the network are very likely to do that too. I think we'll continue seeing the amount of nodes trend up and to the right forever. I also think that the percentage of people that run nodes might not trend up and to the right forever. There's a lot of people that are going to use this network that are going to be content to not use one, or they might want to use, keep their Bitcoin on exchanges or use other products like these Treasury companies or whatever to get Bitcoin exposure. May or may not like that, but I do think there's a large cohort of people that are going to want to use those kind of tools and interact with Bitcoin in that way. It's just an interesting thing playing out right now, and it's been kind of strange watching it happen in real time. But it's a very different network even in 4 years than it was when I joined in.
And you are most definitely a power user. You are even using Visual Studio Code for writing a book. Is that do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, that's accurate. Yeah, I've only continued refining my process. Yeah, so the entire book I wrote in a coding editor with all sorts of other programming tools and version control and AI things. And yeah, I went all out with every possible tool to help me get that thing out and make it as good as possible.
That's crazy. And you made me think about that, because I actually, I was a programmer myself. Now I haven't programmed since a longer time, something serious. And I always loved those environments, it was controlled. There was like nice plugins. The editor was amazing. Like you could customize so many things. And you have the feeling that you have full control, next to having Google, docs or like something like that, where you're like, it feels a little bit clunky if you're really used to this power tool of like Visual Studio Code or some other editors that you might use. So I still use I have a Google Docs document open right now, so I use that the most, just for like the convenience, I guess, and like for like all those things. But man, Visual Studio Code or other editors, like they're really great, like just writing things down.
The whole like thesis behind doing that for me was the idea, especially in fiction writing. I'm sure it's true with other venues of writing too. That's just the one that I know the best, is the more fluidly you can get an idea from being in your head down on the page, the better things will be. So the more you can let ideas flow through you, like the less friction there is between that, the better the things you write will be. So I just optimized as best as possible from like idea phase to writing phase. And it was really useful for me just in that way specifically. Because if you're hopping between things really frequently, you're just less deeply ingrained into those flow states that are required to write something like that. Kind of a different way to think about it, but I really think of like fiction writing as mining for ideas. Like, you're consistently trying to get into those deep flow states and attach to ideas and then get them down on page and refine and refine and refine them. So you want to make that process of capturing ideas as smooth as possible.
Yeah, I hear you. You probably are very far away from social media, like from the phone and all of that, because like I struggle a lot with that, like because with all I do, social media is so connected to it. Like everything I do is I kind of have to open Twitter for that. I kind of have to open apps for that. So it's really hard to get away from that, and it like just takes you out of that completely.
Yeah, I mute everything, turn everything off. I even go so far as to put the exact same song on repeat for like hours consecutively, so there's less stimulus. Or I'll listen to really boring things to help me get as deep and focused as possible into what I'm presently working on. I do think the skill of writing code helps with this because that same exact kind of mental focus and flow state is required in both endeavors. So yeah, like people I've been talking to recently about the amount of time spent writing the book, and they're like, "Yeah, that's not like real writing time, right?" I'm like, that was 100% focus, no distractions, phone off, writing time that was spent.
What was your writing time? I think you mentioned it last time. Do you have like a total number? Did you track it somehow?
Roughly, I don't have it exact, but yeah, roughly 3,000 hours start to finish on the book, which is kind of ridiculous. But like, I was recently talking to somebody about how I could have released this thing probably a year ago, but I just felt like investing more and more time into refining it and being the best actual story I could make that I will be very pleased with and proud of 20 years from now was the goal. So yeah, I didn't leave anything on the table with this one. I gave it my all.
I don't know that by heart. I just Googled it. Those are over 4 months continuous writing. Like that, this is like, the 3,000 hours are like, more than 4 months if you just like line it up, like without sleep, without anything else like that. That's crazy amount of work.
Yeah, I have not heard it put like that before. I basically just wrote every single day. I've had this as a habit for like almost a decade now, and just did it constantly in pretty much all my free time. And it was kind of easy to be inspired by Bitcoin too. I sort of felt like I had to produce something for this network since I feel like I've gotten so much from it.
What is it that you have written? I think we talked maybe briefly on the idea of the book last time, but most of them might not have seen this podcast or like are not familiar. What was kind of the idea behind the book?
So I can pull it up here. It's sitting the hardcover sitting right next to me. It's called Blood of the Bourgeoisie, and it is a Bitcoin thriller book, essentially. It starts off with 2 billionaires that have been murdered and speared over the Bull of Bowling Green, or the Bronze Bull on Wall Street. And there's 12 seed words carved into their chest. The main character is a digital forensics specialist. So again, I went pretty nerdy and was a power user into Bitcoin, learning about that character. But it starts there and it expands in taking place over the 4th of July weekend in America. And there is a collection of these events that happen where the bad guy is using Bitcoin to steal from the wealthy and distribute their wealth to poor people. And the main character is trying to stop them from doing so. I don't want to go too much into like what happens at the end of it, but that's kind of the gist about how it starts. And there's I very specifically wrote it in a way, based off of my own preferences. I really wanted a book like this for Bitcoin, but I also really wanted a book that I could give to my wife's reading club or somebody that's not as far down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. That would be so captivating and interesting that they would just read through the story and learn a little bit about Bitcoin on the way. And that was the primary goal there. So I think I've succeeded in doing that. I've already, I just had a phone call yesterday with a friend that said like, that wasn't not as into Bitcoin as me, that was extremely impressed with it, now has all sorts of questions about Bitcoin after having finished it. And there's been a few other cases of Bitcoiner friends of mine that have been getting it for family members, and that's been pretty cool.
Really, really cool. But you openly discuss Bitcoin in there, like Bitcoin is a topic in the book somehow.
Heavily so. The entire plot line is based around it too, where they're using Bitcoin to commit their like plan or whatever, but Bitcoin continues to be central to the theme. Without me spoiling what happens at the end, that Bitcoin is absolutely essential to the plot line, and you learn more and more about it throughout the entire story too. One of my fears was that if I wrote a book that just had Bitcoin on the cover or Bitcoin on the title, a lot of people would be turned off by that, right? Like I have all these people that I love in my life that I would love to expose to Bitcoin. But if I try to give them the Bitcoin standard or Broken Money or some of these just amazing books that exist in the ecosystem, they are not going to read about that. No interest. They don't want to sit down and read a nonfiction book about the history of money, no matter how much I think that's awesome and I would be into that. But they would have a little bit of interest in reading a fiction book, especially one that's not so like slapping them in the face about Bitcoin. So it's kind of the goal is that this thing could be a sly and roundabout way to get a little bit of Bitcoin exposure to a broader audience. But it's also just good if you're a Bitcoiner too, because it's a very captivating book and interesting and has a lot of themes about Bitcoin in it and throughout it.
And this is why I thought about it. So like my sister is 100% in all fiction books. See, she does not read at all nonfiction, like any like finance books or anything like that. Like she, I could give to her the Bitcoin standard, but the chances that she would read more than 10 pages, I think, are very slim. She might surprise me, but I don't think so. I'm on the other hand that I have a very hard time reading fiction stories. So like I'm like the total opposite of my sister. And you and Ratoshi, I think, are the only ones that I know of that wrote now a Bitcoin fiction book. I mean, Ratoshi went a little bit other route where he like doesn't even name Bitcoin in the whole book. But I've really thought with your book that my sister could really love it. So I probably gift it to her and see how it lands, because she has Bitcoin. She does not want to learn about it. She only has Bitcoin because she trusts me. She's literally saying to me like, I trust you, so I have Bitcoin, and I don't want to learn about it. And I think she would be the perfect candidate to just gifted to her, and I'm not even telling her that it's a Bitcoin book. I was like, oh, I just picked it up somewhere randomly.
It's perfect for that. That is kind of how I envision it too, and I have a few of those people in my life. I think that fiction is a different kind of tool to convey messages than nonfiction too. Nonfiction is so straightforward. I love nonfiction. I've probably read slightly more nonfiction than fiction in my life because there was a period earlier on where that's all I read for quite a long time. But there's some people that just learn more through emotions and following characters and through story. Like they just are not as interested in that kind of intense logical book. So one of the three characters that's in the book, it does follow three of them. I only mentioned the forensics analyst. One of the three characters I modeled off of a few people that had escaped their country using Bitcoin. So she is in Sudan in the book and uses Bitcoin to escape from her country with her seed words in her brain, and then continues to use it as a way to just get out of country with rapid currency debasement. And it's one thing for you to learn about that, or to learn about how a country had a currency devaluation or something. But it's different to read through a character where you're actually inside their brain through a story. You're experiencing what they're experiencing, you're living in their thoughts. And to actually do that when they're using Bitcoin in a way that they could not use any other tool in the world for. You could not do that with gold. You could not do that with any kind of fiat currency. And it just shows people in a different way where you get a deeper level of understanding how profound Bitcoin could be for somebody in those kind of situations. So I think for somebody like your sister, that character specifically would do quite well in making them connect more deeply with the kind of problems that Bitcoin can solve that no other tool on the planet can.
And there's also something really interesting about fiction where it gives someone the opportunity to get away from the reality, from their own reality that they're currently living, and imagine something completely new. Imagine a new tool within the world that is existing, or a complete new world, like wherever you go with that. And it is really interesting because if you have, if anyone orange pilled anyone out there, and like probably most of the listeners have tried orange pilling someone, sometimes it's really hard not to teach them about Bitcoin, but to unlearn all the BS that they learn through their career and their lives within the fiat machine. So, and then to break through that is really hard. But what if you can just like go into a whole nother character, a whole nother perspective, and learn with not your mind, but with the mind of the character, this new tool. And so this is like, I really like that because it gives the people that perspective change. And I mean, I say that now because even though I'm not a huge fiction fan myself, but maybe I also haven't given it a fair chance. But I think, a lot of people can really benefit from that, like perspective change to understand a new, kind of problem, something that they haven't really thought about before.
It's really the only medium that lets you ride around in another person's thoughts. You can do it a little bit through like movies and TV shows too, where you really are close to a person. But in writing or reading something, you literally every couple paragraphs you'll hear a thought from that person. So you are in their brain with them, experiencing the world through their eyes. And that's one of the main reasons why people love reading fiction books. It's because it lets them try on other people's lives periodically. Um, and to go back to your previous point of like Bitcoiners being so bad at orange pilling people, I have been bad at it previously, and I've been around Bitcoiners that have tried to inspire other people to learn about Bitcoin by just immediately telling them about the network, about 21 million, going into like nodes and these things, which I think are interesting, but is not what you should lead with when you're trying to tell somebody about Bitcoin. I have a background as a teacher. I've taught programming for a while. I teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And one of the things that I learned a lot through that process of teaching multiple domains was that it's less about how much information you throw at somebody. It's a lot more about how much you can inspire their interest. It does not have to be a fire hose of new information that's going to get them. It's more likely just a little nugget of inspiration where they can see something with a more like either optimistic lens or how it could impact them, or just enough to have some kind of interest. And that was sort of the ethos that I modeled the book on. It's like, I just want to inspire interest in Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be deep and technical, although there is some technical stuff towards the end. It just like slowly ramps up, but it's more focused on inspiring interest in the network overall. And I think that's generally a better way to teach most people, not all. I think the average Bitcoiner might love going deep into money, but there's this whole giant cohort of people that are not into Bitcoin yet that I think need a different strategy of communicating with them if you actually want to get them interested in Bitcoin. I'm hoping my book can help to do that for people.
I love that because it's all about sparking that curiosity for them to actually look into something a little bit deeper. And I try to convey that a lot to people because I see it everywhere. I see it even like on Bitcoin meetups when there's a new person coming and then there's like 5 people on him and like, you have to do this and you have to do this, and like you don't know this. And like, oh, that poor guy. He's like, he will come home and don't know anything about Bitcoin. Like he didn't learn anything. And the only thing he learned is like, oh, there's so much to do. Like, where do I even start? And I'm like very different in orange pilling. Like I try to like spark their curiosity. Like I more try to actually ask them questions of like what they think about Bitcoin, what they think about money, and what they think about like the world, and kind of like gauge from there. And I found it very interesting when they get curious, when they think about a question they have never thought of before. All of a sudden, like I have those rare moments where someone comes back to me a week later and like, oh, I went so down the rabbit hole. Like wait, like what? From that one question, like, oh yeah, like because this one thing sparked, and then like I watched this YouTube video, and this led me to this podcast, and then I bought this book on Audible, and then I listened to this, and like, oh wait, you did this all in a week? Like if I would push it to him, he would never have done it. But he got curious because he got like a question. Like, and the brain always wants to like answer the questions that he gets. And so if he gets like a good question that actually interests him and like plays into his, how should I say it, plays into his interests and what he cares for, this can really trigger someone who's like, oh, okay, that's why I should care about that. And that's why like asking questions is probably a better way to orange pill someone than like stuffing a lot of information down their throats.
I think the same applies for persuasion too, where if you can get somebody talking about a thing with you and get them to explain where you're coming from, something about the act of doing that forces them to actually think through it too, which is one of the unique things about fiction, where If you're going to read through a fiction book, you're going to be in these people's heads. You actually have to think through it with them. With this kind of thing in mind, I specifically have some characters disagreeable about Bitcoin in the book. It's not just me as the author saying like, this is what you have to believe. This is what my main character believes. I have multiple different people that are extremely skeptical, some in different ways than others, lots of natural questions that come up around Bitcoin. So one of the hopes here is that people that are reading it that are not down the rabbit hole yet have some of those natural questions too, and then get to ask them with the character and be part of this conversation rather than feeling like it's just a forced idea on them. They kind of get to be a watcher of a good conversation about Bitcoin and see how it can be used directly through the story too. I think these are just kind of core concepts in learning, and I try to apply them as best to my ability.
I want to come back to one thing you said about the storyline because I think it's interesting, and I'm curious what you think on that. Yeah, maybe I heard it wrong, but you said like the bad guy stealing from the rich and giving it to the poor.
Yep.
I love that. Two thoughts in my mind. I was like, oh yeah, like that's what I hope Bitcoin can do to a certain extent. But I'm going back and forth on that of like how much Bitcoin will actually do that. Because if there's a true free market, I think there will be still a very big spike in the a big gap between like rich and poor. Just that poor will be so much better off than the poor. Like the poor in Bitcoin will look like the upper middle class in fiat. That's kind of like my point. And then also, I'm not sure if this is even like a story in America, but it is a very famous story in Austria, at least. It's a kid's story, Robin Hood. Do you know? Like, you know about it, right? Yeah, like sometimes it's only like in Austria, but like that's probably like I think there's also like a similar kind of story where like he steals from the rich and like gives to the poor, like if I'm not mistaken.
You definitely, I reference Robin Hood like 3 times in the book. So there's a couple different ideas here. Let me answer them kind of in order. So I think it's deeply unethical to like be stealing from rich people. But it's also this idea that I feel so much in my friends right now, where they're deeply resentful for people wealthier than them and they wish them ill, whether it through violence or not. So one of the characters in the book, who's the Bitcoiner, who is very much against that and thinks that Bitcoin has the opportunity to create more hope and abundance through a more fair system for everybody. There'll still be rich people always, but to like almost exactly what you were saying, it's just a fair system. The bad guy is using Bitcoin as a way to distribute and steal from the rich people and then give to the poor people. So they have very opposing viewpoints there, and that's where a lot of the conflict comes out of, is how they're using the Bitcoin network and how they're viewing and treating rich people. To the Robin Hood thing, I think there's some interesting stuff there where, like back in the Robin Hood story, again, they stole from the rich, gave to the poor. There's some mechanically interesting things about Bitcoin that make that stealing from the rich and giving to the poor a lot more powerful. And that's kind of one of the things that the bad guy is trying to do without having me give too much away about it. But like this technology, essentially, if you take a lot of Bitcoin from somebody and distribute it over the network to 1,000 other people, like happens in the book, like it's borderline impossible to take that from them or trace them. Where in the Robin Hood story, like you could see who got the gold or that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of interesting nuances there, and a more futuristic version of the story in some ways.
The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC free Bitcoin. That's why I use Simple Mining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need.
How do you think about Bitcoin actually being that kind of equalizer, that like it will be a more fair world, or like the gap between rich and poor is kind of like tightened, and like there's not such a big gap? Because I've got like at least 2-3 like very opposing views already on the podcast where like they like, oh, like Bitcoin will like equal the world, and I'm like, I'm not sure. And then people say like, oh, it will be even worse than fiat, and I'm like, oh, I don't think so. But how do you think about that?
I think it's just fairer. It may or may. I think over time it'll normalize things, but right now, those who are at the top of the system benefit from the Cantillon effect. I think you've had guests talk about that before, where essentially being the closer to the fiat money printer you are, the more disproportionately you benefit. Whether or not that's literally being in Washington, D.C., closer to where money is entering the system, or politicians who are influencing monetary policy, but also like business owners that are getting bailouts and things from the government. Under a more Bitcoin-centric system or more Bitcoinized system, it's not possible to be getting bailouts if we have this hard money-based world, which eliminates the ability to inject money in a way that the higher echelons of society can benefit from disproportionately. Just removing that mechanic from the world, the money printers from the world, at least removes that effect. It's not going to magically make billionaires on the same level as you or I. And I don't think that it should. A lot of these people have created massive amounts of value for the world. And even though you may not love that there's a wealth disparity between the two of you, they did earn a lot of this. And I think it's deeply unethical to be stealing it away from them or taking it from them. So I think a better way to do that in a more peaceful way is just to create a new system that's fair. And over time, without this toxic injection of money into the system, we can slowly move towards a world that's more fair for everybody.
Let me pull it up because we just had that, like, like it's not even like a days old. Elon Musk now for the first time hit the $500 billion, which I think is just crazy. And because there's like those memes out there, then go woke, go broke, and then he's kind of the reverse effect of that. And I do love seeing the reaction to that news. Like if you look in the mainstream news cycle, like it was everywhere. Like it was even, it's so funny, like only like 0.5% of my audience probably can relate now to that, because it's like a very Austrian specific niche topic, and only like 0.5% of all my audience is Austrian. I watched the news anchor Armin Wolf in the Austrian national TV, like he's the main guy, read the news, and he did it in the evening, and there was like then this one small kind of plot where he talked about 20 seconds long, like Elon Musk kind of reached that one. And the level of envy that you can feel that he got in that, it was just crazy. And like, if he would have been speaking English, I would have played it, but like it's unfortunately German, of course, in Austria. But it was crazy. I heard him say that and I laughed out loud, and I was like, that feels so weirdly good. But also weirdly, I'm like why do I laugh about that? Because like, he represents all those different character traits, and then it's like he really hates. You can feel really the hate that he like. Oh, like, why is this guy so successful? Like, the world is so evil. Oh. Like you can really feel it, and I don't know. Like this just reminded me of like, oh, that's kind of the fiat world, but I think Elon Musk would also be very successful in the Bitcoin world. Like, I have that feeling that he puts in a lot of proof of work.
Absolutely. He's creating incredible value for the world and will continue to do so no matter what system he's in. This is why I just think it's so frustrating we live in this fiat system, because there's a person like Elon Musk is making so many individuals' lives better all the time with his work. But it just doesn't feel fair, because people see how large the wealth gap is getting between him and them. And that's a justified emotion too. I think that's very valid to feel that way. I feel that way sometimes myself too. I just think there needs to be, like, rather than some kind of violent wealth distribution or taking from them via like extra taxation, we just need a fair base layer where we're all playing by the same rules. Like, there's always going to be gaps in how much the wealthy versus the poor make, but if we can live by a little bit more fair rules, I think that gap slowly closes, and at least people don't feel like they're being stolen from, because just feeling inflation, whether or not people understand what it is, but watching things watching themselves get poorer and poorer, or things getting more expensive over time, kind of radicalizes them slowly. And they have this anger because they've seen their life get worse over time. And they look to people like Elon Musk as the ones that are taking that, because they've watched him get richer. And they don't realize that it's actually systemically broken, not just them stealing from them. I think there's a little bit of a core misunderstanding there. And that kind of core misunderstanding has led to violence a lot in the past. So yeah, the book is called Bourgeoisie, right? Like, bourgeoisie is like back in the French Revolution, we're getting murdered by the poor people in the country. And this kind of thing has happened frequently in the past. And there's a lot of rising violence right now in the world towards these people. And I hope that Bitcoin can at least provide a way to eliminate some of that violence and give the lower classes in the world a little bit more optimism. And I feel like it can, personally.
And I often ask myself, like, where this is coming from. Like, I didn't get anything like my parents gave me like amazing childhood, like, and all of that, like, but I never really received any like big money or anything like that. And to this day, like, when I look at all the statistics, like, I'm not even middle class in Austria. But it is interesting for me then when I look at someone like Elon Musk, I get super inspired. Like, I know I probably will never end up being even remotely close to what he has achieved, because it's just like tremendous amount of work and tremendous amount also of like his life circumstances. But then I'm wired in a weird way where I think that I can do the same thing. And so seeing him succeed actually inspires me. But then when I look into most of my friends that are in the same age range than me, they look at him and say, that's unfair. He should give us something. And I'm like, what did you do to deserve something from him? Like, of course, he could give you a lot of things. Like, he has a lot of money. He could give you a lot of money. But how did you deserve this? I can tell you how he deserved it. And maybe he got more because of the fiat system. Like, there's all those like subsidies that he got, like, and all of that, like, oh, like the SpaceX only is good because of like X. Like, you can make a lot of weird arguments. I get that. And Bitcoin is also making that, like, he's a fiat guy. But he still did it. Like he operated in the same system as you, and he succeeded, and me not. And I choose to let myself inspire by that, and not drive myself like, oh, like we should tear him down. And I think he got a lot of the hate when he got in political realm. I think that is probably the major reason why he's no longer in politics, because he saw that it's not good for his companies.
Yeah. So question for you. Do you think that you feel more that way after Bitcoin? Or would you have held that belief towards Elon Musk where you view him optimistically before Bitcoin? Was this something that was in you before or after?
It is always really hard for me to say because I've got Bitcoin so early on. I'm now 27 and I have Bitcoin since I'm 21 years old. So I've got basically Bitcoin all my life. But with him specifically, I was a Tesla investor. I was all in Tesla before I was even buying my first Satoshi. So I was always inspired by him way before even Bitcoin. But those questions of unfairness of the system, like I never really considered. I started considering that, and I have to preface that by I lived in a very nice childhood. Like I was very protected, and my parents just did like everything perfectly. Like they really made like a great job in like protecting me and like in doing all of those things. So I never felt like, oh, like I want more. And if someone comes from a more poor family, like my family is not by any measurements rich, but we're also not poor. So like if someone comes from a really poor family where you struggle for food and where you actually have like real problems of like, oh, how do we survive the next month, and not like, oh, I cannot afford a new iPhone, like not like weird problems like that. I think you might look differently at that, but still, I feel like we should get inspired by that. But I get your point of like, having Bitcoin makes it easier because you look differently at the whole system and you look a little bit more relaxed at how fair or unfair the system is. Is that what you're kind of getting to?
I genuinely just wanted to know because I've been thinking about this a lot too. I'm certain Bitcoin has made me more optimistic about this and more respectful of people's proof of work that they've put in than the older version of me. But I also held that belief to some degree beforehand. I too have always looked at him with a lot of respect and inspiration. So I'm kind of curious if those people are inherently more likely to find Bitcoin, or if it actually, you can be pessimistic about people like that and come into contact with the Bitcoin network and become more optimistic. I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, likely, because I've certainly felt myself become much more optimistic since being in Bitcoin. I'm just like, there's a lot more financial hope for my family. There's the elimination of a lot of the problems we talked about with fiat creating financial disparities is really optimistic and fills me with a lot of hope. But I also think you have to have some optimism to even be willing to learn about Bitcoin in the first place, to take a little bit of a leap to explore it more, and to have enough belief that like good things can exist in the world to even do it at all. So I think there's a little bit of both there.
And there's one thing that Seyr says that goes about like people that have a need to know about Bitcoin will find Bitcoin, something like that. And this is maybe one thing that I disagree with, because I see so many people that really need Bitcoin, that where I'm like, they would tremendously benefit from Bitcoin, or they would have tremendously benefited from Bitcoin, like if they would have adopted it 5 years ago, and they will tremendously benefit from it if they adopted it now in 5 to 10 years. It's obviously nothing that like goes overnight. It's just like a long story. And then I see coming back a lot of suitcoiners coming in where they might already have done good in the fiat world, and now they're getting into Bitcoin, and that might also be a little bit of the frustration that the other side of treasury companies say that, oh, like why are they now getting into Bitcoin? Like they don't need it. it's not made for them. And I say it one more time: Bitcoin is for everyone. The worst thing about Bitcoin is that it's also for your enemies. And so this is kind of the question I always have, that like how do we orange pill the people that like need it the most, but like they are the least open to that idea, because they so deeply believe that the system is rigged that they don't even want to. They're too scared to look up and see for a solution. I don't know like how to better describe it, but like it is really sometimes even heartbroken for me to see like the people that need it the most like don't get into there, but then BlackRock and all those fiat giants like now get into Bitcoin, which is positive obviously for all of us, but also it's like I rather have a Bitcoin price of 30,000 and have the single mom next door buy Bitcoin than have a Bitcoin price of 500,000 with like BlackRock and all the people long term. We will anyways crash for 1 million or 10 million, 100 million. So like right now, like I'm rooting for not BlackRock.
And I frequently said that it's way more fun to watch people doing their small like stacks of sats compared to Seyr doing the massive buys. I'm really optimistic on the Treasury company thing. I think it's a massive positive for the world. But it just feels so good to watch somebody that's brand new to Bitcoin, like a 2025, they just started stacking recently, start to eclipse their small goals. I just think that's so much cooler. Like it's changing this person's life in a fundamental way, where a lot of the Larry Finks of the world were already incredibly wealthy. I do still think there's room for those people. Like you said, Bitcoin still is in its early days, so there's still plenty of time for people to enter the network and have their wealth saved. So, yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, part of the reason I wrote this thing was because I feel that in a lot of people around me that I know could use Bitcoin, but they just are not going to hear about it in like the straightforward monetary ways. So I don't think that's the only answer. I think there's a lot of different ways, and hopefully more funnels, top of funnels that can get people exposed. Yeah, I've even seen Treasury companies be that for some people. I had a friend who's very into trading stocks, no interest in Bitcoin, thought it was stupid, started learning about MSTR and other Treasury companies, and then eventually bought real Bitcoin and now is like becoming a Bitcoiner. So I do think that's a positive too. I'm hoping we can have more of these tops of funnels that get some of those people into Bitcoin, but I think we need to communicate to them in a different way than the computer nerds or the Austrian economics like students got exposed to this thing.
Yeah, and I asked actually my YouTube community like how many of you, like I asked, like are you into treasury companies also? Like if you hold Bitcoin, do you also hold a treasury company? And 50% said yes, like it was like 46 or something like that, which was kind of surprising, which how fast this went. Like 5 years ago, 100% would have said no, because it like treasury companies was just getting started and nobody really had them. I think Seyr just like got started with the first one maybe 5.5 years ago at this point. And now it is such a huge part of the community. It's such a huge, like they have their own conferences, like they have their own subculture, and it just grew out of nothing. And it's grown like really fast. And I just find it interesting that we have treasury companies now around and have that thing. I sometimes feel like a lot of them, especially those who don't do a lot of like actual business and just go leverage, they probably will be washed out. I'm not sure, but like if you don't produce anything at a company and just take on leverage, a few companies can do that with providing financial services, but like, I don't know how many of them can actually do that. What's your take on like treasury companies and how it kind of has grown over the last like 2 years, I would say?
It's been wild to see. So a little bit of a business background. We talked about this in the last podcast, and I think it's just interesting, like intellectually, to learn about these things and see how they work behind the scenes. It's just a different kind of economy or thing evolving in real time in front of us. And with that, there's been a lot of euphoria and these wildly massive overblown MNAVs that have now corrected quite a bit. Couple things. Like, first thing that crosses my mind is that this is kind of good for Bitcoin too, in the sense this massive correction we've recently seen in these treasury companies. I've seen a lot of people that got exposed to Bitcoin via the treasury companies in the last 6 months to a year that are now buying real Bitcoin because they've been shaken out of their treasury company positions because of a massive correction. I think that's incredibly positive for Bitcoin. It's kind of probably not fun to experience for them. I've had treasury companies that have been destroyed too, so I feel that pain as well. But I'm optimistic that it can be more of a driving factor to Bitcoin adoption and force some of these people to learn about real Bitcoin, since Bitcoin has outperformed a lot of these treasury companies so well. That's one thought. Second thought is how this industry evolves. I think the preferred thing has by far been the most interesting to me. Essentially, all of these companies trading at MNAVs that are 1 or higher, their main mechanic to get more Bitcoin is to print shares and just buy Bitcoin. I think a lot of them are going to fail, inevitably. To your point, they just don't really provide a real value. I think the ones that create some novel way to turn financial instruments into Bitcoin are going to succeed, specifically if they're in a jurisdiction that allows them to do that. Microstrategy has been doing that very successfully, setting up these preferred shares, and it's sort of in the early phases of making these tools. I'm really optimistic about Metaplanet being able to do similar things, since they exist in a jurisdiction of Japan that has it's literally optimal if you are creating yield instruments, since Japan has some of the lowest yields in the entire world, if not the lowest, and has an extremely conservative investor base. So I think those are really interesting dynamics here. But I'm just kind of watching this play out right now. And I think it's really important, as much fun as it is to talk about and as much euphoria people feel as these things are moving, to make sure you understand real Bitcoin too. It's a top of funnel, is how I phrased it earlier, where a lot of people are getting first exposed to Bitcoin through these things. And I think that's a really positive improvement. But don't only hold these things, and make sure you continue your educational journey too. A couple thoughts there, but that's sort of my general where I'm at right now, at least in the present market after this big correction.
I don't know if you've done it intentionally, but a lot of the same sentences could have been said about altcoins. Like, I guess some like they got burned in altcoins, and that's why they like now see it Bitcoin, because like the safe haven, like they end up in real Bitcoin anyways, and they're kind of top of a funnel. It's also how some of the altcoins, they like, oh, like they come in with some trading token, with some gaming token, and now they end up at real Bitcoin. Just something that I saw. Like, obviously, like, I just want to make that very clear. Strategy and Ethereum is very different. Like, you cannot compare those two at all. But it's interesting how someone that being Bitcoin focused, talking about altcoins and talking about the treasury companies, sometimes uses like the same linguistics for that.
It feels like the same kind of cycles playing out once more, where there's retail euphoria that comes into these new fancy instruments because they're trying to catch up to the Bitcoin returns that they missed out on, and then they get burned, and then eventually they learn about Bitcoin. It kind of is a cycle that it just appears people are going to have to go through over and over again.
Do you feel like that with Bitcoin being so dominant, with Bitcoin being such a clear leader in the traditional financial space, and nobody in the traditional financial space cares at all about any other crypto coins, like the ETFs are focused solely on Bitcoin. I mean, there's like an Ethereum ETF, and like I know about that, but like if you look at the pure volume, you're like, yeah, like there's only Bitcoin, and then there are treasury companies only on the Bitcoin side. Like it seems to be in TradFi Bitcoin one. And then at the same time, if you want to have higher returns now on Bitcoin, or leverage, in any kind of way, you can now just go and buy some leverage tool, on strategy, the preferred stock options. You can even leverage the leverage that the preferred stocks are already doing. And so you get even a bigger number crop technology if you want. So, is that kind of the real death now of like cryptocurrencies, where like altcoins for if we have now the treasury companies?
I've been saying this for like a year now. I don't understand why you'd hold any of these things if your goal is to outperform Bitcoin. Like, at least hold something that's adjacent to the Bitcoin ecosystem. Like, Ethereum does not, it's not built on Bitcoin anyway. It's just this other thing. If you genuinely want to make a more accurate bet on Bitcoin, these things seem like the clear tool to do so. I don't think most people should do that. I'm just saying, like, it's a net better for Bitcoin than the crypto mania that has existed in the past. And one other thought that I wanted to make sure I mentioned that I think is kind of interesting is like Bitcoin's inherent decentralizing properties. So something that kind of worried me when IBIT first launched was centralization of Bitcoin, right? Similar things are concerning about MSTR, where these single parties are getting a incredibly large position of Bitcoin, and that does not give them direct control over the network or anything. But in the case of hard forks or things, it could give them a little bit more ability to persuade people in one direction or the other. They could threaten to sell off one of the forks versus the other, that kind of thing. So I was a little bit concerned about that, especially since as options markets evolve, the more successful, like the more successful an options like market becomes around something like IBIT, the more there's a centralizing force there because people want to have better liquidity among options. So rather than throwing money into like FBTC or some of these other smaller ETFs, they have the incentive to go to the largest ETF or go to something like MSTR. That was really concerning to me right away. And it's an inherently centralizing force and kind of antithetical to some of the ideas of Bitcoin. So one of the things that actually is kind of optimistic about treasury companies, in my opinion, is that it kind of could be a decentralizing force if people would rather speculate on Bitcoin with treasury companies comparatively to big ETFs, where it's smaller companies that are holding Bitcoin in different jurisdictions compared to just BlackRock holding it in their big ETF. And I think that's a positive thing that we're very early days of seeing, but I'm very hopeful the treasury company industry continues to grow and evolve, because I'd prefer to see Bitcoin in the hands of smaller companies rather than just in a big BlackRock ETF.
Yeah, and we also should not forget, because we already saw, we're saying it so many times that like retail is not here and it's all driven by institutions, but retail is buying treasury companies. Retail is buying a lot of the buying that BlackRock ETF is doing is also just high net worth individuals, also retail clients, not just companies. And behind companies, at the end of the day, there's also an individual. So like it's all kind of individuals, not company driven. But so it is just interesting for me because I think retail will, and I'm curious, what do you think? But like retail currently seems to be not that excited about Bitcoin. And it seems to be more driven by institutional investors, and more like treasury companies, more TradFi, more like BlackRock and that kind of thing, and less like, oh, like the retail guy. But a lot of that, I think, is just because we got so much bigger. It's for retail to have a voice in the system. It's getting harder and harder because it takes more and more money to move the market. Like, I don't know, that might also just be a reason. How do you look at like the retail crowd?
I think they're coming for sure. But I just saw a thing of Google search trends for Bitcoin the other day being just so low, like almost the same as it was back in the bear market in 2022, 23. There clearly is not euphoria yet. But at the same time, I do think a lot more retail investors are here, but they're buying in more mechanical ways than they have previously. Rather than go on Coinbase and just YOLO into Bitcoin at the top, I think the kind of people that have come they're not your average like person that's like out of college just learning about markets and throwing money at stuff. I think you're more a little bit more seasoned investors and just want to have some exposure to Bitcoin instead of just going all in on spot. They are slowly and incrementally building positions in these ETFs or treasury companies. And that kind of buying looks so much different when you're doing it in a little bit more of a methodical way. Not to mention that if you buy some IBIT and then IBIT goes and buys Bitcoin on behalf of the shareholder, they're doing so in a way that's less likely to move Bitcoin price. than previous bull runs, people were going onto an exchange and buying at the absolute most euphoric times, because naturally that's when people get exposure to it and they all do it at the same time. And that was creating wild peaks where there's a lot less rather volatility because of how these institutions are buying. Whereas, so if there is euphoria into something like MSTR or IBIT, it's kind of being dampened in the way that they buy Bitcoin, so it doesn't actually appear on chain as much as it may have used to.
It's interesting to think about the different impacts that markets have on Bitcoin. Long term, it just goes up.
Yeah,
like that's what I'm always coming back towards. Like we sometimes get so absorbed by like what's going on with like core versus NOS and like retail and like all of that, and then like I have to remind myself like just step back. We've just reached a new all-time high. We've gone up like thousands of percent in the last 5 years. Like it's been an absolute crazy journey to even be in Bitcoin the last couple of years.
I do feel this in myself that the longer I've been here, the more I do kind of want to check out a little bit. Like, I know what this thing is. I know it's going to keep being around. I don't need to be watching it as closely as I once did in the early days. I still find it really interesting. I'm not quite there yet, but I do feel that inside myself of like, I know this, like, you have so much certainty that this thing is just going to keep spitting out block after block and just keep going up in value because it's the only perfectly scarce thing that's ever existed. It just, you really can just stack sats, live a good life, enjoy, like, if you want to.
Yeah, and I watch the Bitcoin ecosystem now closer as ever, and well knowingly that I don't have to. Like I can just relax. But yeah, I have one question that I asked each and every one of my guests that have returned on the podcast, and you have now returned on the podcast. What have you learned outside of Bitcoin since your last appearance?
Give me a second. I've got a couple here. I think one of the things that I've learned the most over the last year has been just the value of the relationships that people close to you. Like, I have another kid on the way now. I had a kid before we talked last time too, but our family is growing, and just how beautiful a simple life with family can be. Bitcoin in a lot of ways did inspire me to have a family. I think we talked about that really briefly last time I was here. Having so much long-term hope for the future. That's just continued for me. And now my family is growing yet again. And the more time I've spent being a dad, the more grateful I am for fatherhood. And that's been a big learning, and it continues to be every single day for me. I'm very excited for my family's future.
I love that. That's really beautiful. Really cool. The end routine is so in there for me, and I almost forgot it now. In the almost 625th episode, we have end routine in the podcast, as you well know, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, and it's funny. This question actually came up now 3 or 4 times already in the end routine. The question that came up was, what would you ask Satoshi if you could ask him one single question, and what do you think his answer would be?
Well, that's a good question. I would probably ask something along the lines of, what things has Bitcoin done that you did not expect it to do when you created the network? Or what has been the biggest surprise about the way Bitcoin has evolved since you first made it? Without making too many assumptions on who they were, like, they clearly saw the beginning phase of this, but it's taken so many wild turns, and it's just such a free market that it's evolved in so many different ways. It's hard to predict where this thing would go. And I have the intuition that Satoshi would not have been able to predict quite a few things that have happened. Treasury companies being wildly strange. Like, I would never have predicted that before they happened. That seems like it kind of evolved. So that might be one of his answers. But that one specifically, because it's just been... it feels like a living organism that keeps changing and doing its own things, and it's just growing, and it's hard to intuit in some of the ways that it's going to grow, even though so much money rides on this thing and so many people are speculating around how it might change in the future. People are terrible at doing so, and it's taken a lot of different turns and things. So I'd be really curious which one of those things he predicted incorrectly.
When I think about that question, it's so interesting because I think all technical things he probably like was well aware of, even the core versus nots, the filter thing, the op return things. And it was even like very early on in the Bitcoin talk forums. A lot of the questions that we are now discussing were already discussed 10 years ago.
Yep.
And it's like nothing new actually. But things that might be like very surprising to him is like how much Bitcoiners hate sunscreen, like, and things like that. He's like, oh, like I just came here to make peer-to-peer cash, and now they're going after sunscreen. Like, what the heck is going on?
It's hilarious, the little subgroups that evolve and exist around Bitcoin that have huge correlations with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for being on the podcast. Before I let you go, where can people find you and where can people find the book?
Best way for both is probably just on X. I'm Sully Michael, then Sully, and Michael spelled like my name. My website is michaelrsullivan.com. You can go there. That has a little bit of information about my first book and the new one that just released. And if you go to my profile or on either spot, you can find a link to the book on Amazon too. That'll be out there. It's available right now.
It's actually, that's a weird question maybe on the end, but does actually the new book also get more interest on the old book? Like, do you notice something that like more people now pick up also the old book because there's a new book out?
Yeah, for sure. Sales have spiked on the first one too because people loved the second one or the one I just released, and they immediately go buy the first one afterwards. The first one is wildly different, has nothing to do with Bitcoin, but yeah, they must like the writing style at least.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on, and I can't wait. Oh gosh, like I forgot the most important questions. Have you started writing the third book?
Not yet. I have a plan for it though. I really want to, but I kind of want to wait for the free market to play out a little bit and hear what Bitcoiners think of it before I make any too concrete decisions.
Awesome. So I'm looking forward to probably not having a finished third book with the next podcast, but maybe we already have an idea of like where the next book could be going when you're next time on the podcast. So yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for being on, and also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye bye.
This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.